Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Maybe Eric, if you just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, we
Awesome.
can.
Okay, great. So thank you for joining today's session to go through why AWS, Amazon Web Services, and the Partner Program Overview. We've found that there's quite a lot of partners in New Zealand that may fit in terms of a partnership in AWS, and it is one of the more complicated programs to understand. So we've simplified that in terms of how that'll be presented today to hopefully give you a better idea of how to get started with AWS. So just by way of introduction, I'm Jackie Young. I lead the AWS business here in New Zealand for Westcon, and I'm joined today by Eric Kruger, who is our product manager or VBM on the Westcon, on the AWS business within Westcon. We've also got our BDMs that are focused on AWS, Jason Gass in the north and Carl Hawke in Wellington on the call, and Melandi's our marketing manager on AWS as well. So they'll be here to answer any questions if you have them as well. So I'm going to take you through why cloud with AWS, the program itself, how the tiers, certifications, profitability, and customer funding programs, etc., work, the transaction models, and how Westcon can enable you as a partner to get started, and then what would be the next steps to actually start a partnership with AWS. There will be a follow-up technical overview session that we're going to send out an invitation for on the 10th of September. So that'll be 10 a.m. on the 10th of September. So you'll see that invitation come shortly. So today won't be technically focused. It's just more the business side of how you get started and what customers might be looking for when they're considering AWS. So the AWS team at Westcon, we've got it kind of split into two areas, and I'll explain why. So for the New Zealand focus team, Melita Brooke is the director on this part of the business. So you see myself there as the lead for AWS, and you've got Eric, Jason, and Carl on the phone. Juwan is the person, our pre-sales SE, who will host that session on the 10th of September. And then we've got Melandi, who does our marketing. So we're all New Zealand focused only, I should say. And then within the APAC Partner Success Centre, that's been set up to run the cloud business across APAC because there's synergies in this business in terms of how it needs to be run. One of the biggest would be around the billing of AWS. It's quite complicated, which I'll show you when we get to the transaction model slide. So that's separated out under Rod Scown's organization with our billing specialists to make sure that that's grossly simplified by the time it comes to our partners here in New Zealand. We also have underneath Jason Hull, a technical specialist, partner program manager, and an inside sales rep, although that inside sales rep is predominantly focused on Singapore at the moment. Okay, so why cloud, and or specifically why cloud with AWS as well? Shrink down these videos in case they're in the way. So in terms of cost, on average, there's a 36% saving when you move from on-premise infrastructure to cloud infrastructure. If you look at SQL Server, it's a 49% saving. And you'll find that because you're not having to refresh this infrastructure every 3 years or 5 years or whatever the refresh period is that a customer's under. So you'll find the infrastructure within AWS is always up to date. And of course, the billing from AWS is monthly. So you can turn this on and turn off in terms of the capacity or the features that are needed from a month-to-month basis. So that then leads us to the scalability of the infrastructure. If you've got customers that are going through mergers and acquisitions, or at least changes in the organization size, if they're using on-premise infrastructure, they're having to buy that new infra, and if they've downsized, then they're going to have to decommission that infrastructure. Regardless, it's a lot of work for an IT team, and I don't think it's getting any easier to recruit and retain IT staff within an end user environment. So that ability to be able to scale up and scale down on a month-by-month basis gets around all of those issues. And then the agility in the features that are available from a vendor like AWS. You would have seen one of the latest releases, probably if you're on LinkedIn or any sort of social media following the cloud market. in generative AI. So AWS have released that technology. All of the cloud vendors have an AI technology of their own, but having that agility with AWS, you'd be able to fire up Gen AI on a monthly billing to give it a try from around, I think it was about 50 or 60 US dollars a month to be able to turn that on and turn that off again. AWS have been in the market for a long, long time doing this. So their services and features that they release are incredibly fast growing, and it's a very developer run vendor. But why AWS specifically for the cloud? In the Gartner Magic Quadrant, they have been top right for 13 years now. In terms of market share from IDC, they outnumber Microsoft 41% to Microsoft's 21% in market share. So you'll find if your customers haven't talked to you about AWS before, they probably are looking at it, or they're probably billing it under their credit card today without potentially your knowledge. And so what we want to do is make sure that when those customers of yours are moving to AWS, that they're doing that with you. And Westcon, being a distributor of AWS in New Zealand, can help any partners to onboard to be able to sell AWS. And I'll talk to you more about how we transact with them later on. There's a bit of a natural pull to Microsoft Azure because of Active Directory. So Active Directory is still ubiquitous in organizations globally. I think that the share that they've got of sign-on is, or authentication, I should say, is over 90% still. And any software that is a cloud software that needs authentication means that they've had to move to Azure Active Directory for that user. So on-prem applications need on-prem Active Directory, and Azure or cloud applications need Azure Active Directory. And so you'll find that the customers sort of naturally end up with the Microsoft Azure footprint, but more than, well, at least twice as often, they are adopting AWS. In terms of what technologies are adopted, when I break down what Westcon's selling in New Zealand, and we've got around 200 customers in New Zealand that are buying AWS. Number one, it's compute. Number two, it's storage, and number three, it's database services. But there's various technologies that you can layer over the top, but they're the three fundamentals. In terms of the downtime by provider as well, those statistics come from AWS. I'm assuming the next provider is Microsoft, given their share of the market. So AWS has 1/3 the downtime of that next provider. When I shared this with another partner in New Zealand about a month ago, they came off mute and said, actually, I can back that up, because when I get my Azure billing, I have to go through and do the reductions because of them not meeting their SLA of uptime. So the bills have to be reduced for the customers. And so they definitely see that AWS is a more stable cloud services provider. And then lastly, in terms of security coverage, so if you've ever tried to secure infrastructure for a client, you'd probably be well aware that it ends up with about 20 vendors that make up the security infrastructure for any user. And it's quite complicated to make sure that you are covering the certifications, the regulations, and the frameworks for all that infrastructure. When you move to a cloud provider, you end up with what's called a shared responsibility model, which is what's copied in down the bottom there, where AWS ends up being responsible for the security of the infrastructure of the cloud, and the customer is responsibility for what they're using on that infrastructure, so what's in the cloud. But regardless, this just makes it a lot easier in terms of what's being used for compute, storage, database, etc. That is covered with these regulations from AWS. In terms of the capability that Westcon carries in New Zealand, and this would be important for any new partner trying to get started, because we can use these certifications and competencies to provide those services via resellers that don't necessarily have their own. So Westcon-Comstor in New Zealand has the advanced tier in the services path, and I'll explain those different paths under the program. We've got over 50 certifications and one competency, which is the security consulting competency. Westcon's also acquired a company in Europe called Rubura that comes with a whole swag of competencies and certifications on AWS. And we're transferring those standard operating procedures of how they're doing assessments and implementations through to our Partner Success Center in Asia Pacific to deliver that for partners or for end customers via our partners here in New Zealand. So I think combined, we cover more than anything that you would ever need to get going with AWS. So moving on to the partner program, the AWS Partner Program has different paths. Now, I've focused this webinar only on the services path because this is the most common path that a partner would take with AWS here. It's for essentially reselling AWS services to end users. The software path is for ISVs that are building solutions that run on AWS. The hardware path is for devices, so physical devices that are built to work with AWS, the example there of NetApp on tap. And then there's the training path for those that deliver training and the distribution path, which of course Westcon is also on. So within this services path, the tiers that exist start from registered, and then you start to get to select, advanced, and premier. So on this slide on the left-hand side, you can see the requirements, and on the right-hand side, the benefits of each of the tiers. So if you were to sign up with AWS today, you would start as a registered partner. Now this slide, by the way, I'll talk you through it with the laser pointer. But before I do that, you'll be able to see that when you hover over each of these links, it will actually take you to where you need to go. So when we share these slides with you after today, if you wanted to be able to join up with AWS on their partner network, you can just hover over to click there. And the same is true of the following slides as well. So yeah, if you signed up today, you would go to the AWS website and join the APN, the AWS Partner Network here. And then you would go here to sign a distribution seller agreement. Now that DSA allows you to buy essentially from any distributor, but there's only one that you're linked to at a time. So if you signed that today and wanted to work with Westcon, you nominate us as the distributor that you wanted to work with. And if you needed to change that in the future, you can let Amazon know that you need to make that change. But those two simple things would get you signed up as a registered partner. There's no need for accredited individuals or certifications. Pretty quickly though, if you're going to be doing business with AWS, you are likely to want to move to the select path. And there's two reasons for that. Firstly, it's going to get you on the partner locator, if you're wanting to be on the partner locator, which most partners do. And secondly, there's quite a lot of programs that fund your growth within AWS, especially for greenfield customers. And one of the best programs for that is called CEI, this Customer Engagement Incentive. And the scope and the launch phase provide $6,000 per customer in funding to get going. Now that would kick in once you get to select phase as well. To do that, you would need to have 2 salespeople do some online training for 2 hours. You would need 2 pre-sales people to do some online training for 5 hours. And then those same 2 people can go on to do the cloud practitioner certified individual. Now, even though that's got a cost associated with it of $100, you actually get a credit back from AWS for achieving that of $300. So it ends up being cost neutral. You would also need to pay a $2,500 a year APN fee, but you get $3,000 credited back from AWS for that. So once again, it's cost neutral. And then it's a matter of finding 3 customers to have as launched opportunities. So it's a pretty easy one to achieve. It starts to get a little bit harder when you get to advanced, mostly because you need more people. So if you're a small partner in New Zealand, that might not be easy to achieve. But for those that are sort of mid-sized, I'd say it would be accessible for you. You don't need to have a competency. You do need competencies once you get to the premier level. Those ones are pretty hard to achieve. On paper, it says about 2 to 3 months. I would say in practice, it's more like 6 months if you are very, very focused on achieving that competency. And those might be vertical-based competencies or technology-based competencies. Once you get to advanced, though, that's when you're allowed to do a competency. So if you wanted to go down that path, advanced is your first launch pad to be able to achieve that. So advanced plus one competency is still just the advanced tier. If you got 3 competencies and then a truckload of sales, pre-sales, and cloud practitioners, and not to mention quite a lot more customers, then yes, you could achieve the premier status with them as well. Now, in terms of the discount and program structure, the most you could achieve in terms of discount within a reseller with AWS is 29%. There is extra funding that's available for end users, though, and I've separated them out in the deal structure here. What you normally get from AWS, if you're going to transfer an existing customer across that was buying through like direct with AWS, for example, or through another reseller and they wanted to transfer to you, you would get access to the 3% base discount. The partners that also have a competency get access to this 4% as well. So for new partners, unfortunately, the 4% wouldn't be accessible, and Westcon can't pass that one on your behalf. You would, as a new partner, though, get access to the 5% deal reg discount. There's a different program for commercial versus public sector, but both can provide that 5%. And then that program CEI, the customer engagement incentive, gives you up to 7% for new customers over a 24-month period of time. That CEI program is the same one that once you become select can give you access to another $6,000 per customer of funding in the scope and launch phases of that program. The other ones down here are all designed to pass through to the end user, and that's to mitigate the cost of them migrating from on-premise infrastructure to the cloud. And that is the bulk of the opportunity we see with AWS. We don't really see shifts from Azure to AWS so much. It's more that they've gone from on-premise to the cloud. One OLA, OLA stands for Optimization Licensing Assessment. That's for an assessment to be done to show a customer what would be the change in cost and infrastructure to be moving from on-premise to the cloud. You need to have the migration competency to do that, which Westcon does via the Reviewer acquisition. So that skill set's being transferred to APAC for us to run those on your behalf. And then that funding is designed to pass through to the end user. The Migration Acceleration Program, same thing. This is designed to pass through to the end user at 25%. The minimum size for a customer, though, to get access to that is 100K, and the minimum for OLA is 50K. That's ARR, US dollars ARR. There's also the proof of concept funding, which is at 10% of the ARR that can be funded through to the end user. So we can pass on MAP, OLA, and proof of concept as the DISTI for you. We can pass on the CEI GROW, and we can pass on the base discount and the partner originated discount. To simplify that for you so that you don't have to remember what I've actually said, I've created this matrix to be able to show this to you with some of the key things that you would need to understand. So what I was just talking about on the previous slide is who is it designed for. So we've got the top ones are designed for resellers to keep as margin, or if you wanted to flow that through to the customer, it's up to you. The bottom ones, proof of concept, OLA, and MAP, are all designed to flow through to the end customer, though. Now, can we carry this on your behalf? So the technology capability discount, that's the key one that unfortunately we can't. So as a new partner, you would find it that you're competing with that in the market with partners that do have a technical capability, or a competency, I should say, to get access to that 4%. And then the only other ones that we can't pass on is the CEI, that's $6,000 for the scope and launch phase. And I've said no here on the public sector discount, which is sort of true and sort of not true. Technically, we can carry this on behalf of partners, But AWS, you'll find a little bit of friction with the sales team, a bit of resistance if you're not a public sector authorized partner and you're selling into a public sector account. It's very simple to sign up on that program. So if you think you're going to be working on public sector accounts, let us know and we can provide you the form to be able to complete to become a public sector authorized partner. So that one's a pretty easy one. Then you've got what the tier is, but if we can carry this on your behalf, it becomes less important which tier you are. So moving up to select really becomes about getting access to this $6,000 and getting access to the partner locator. And then getting a competency is to get you this 4% technical capabilities discount. That's essentially the motivator to get you to that point. A lot of the programs are designed to develop greenfield with AWS, so new customers. The top two are the only two that's for any customer that's transferring over. So if it was an existing account billing through AWS, then you would get access to the 3% discount straight away. If it's greenfield, you get access to everything except the technical capabilities discount if you were select, for example. Now, is it cash discount or credits? I've put the column in here. And what doesn't it stack with? So you can't, of each of the 5% discounts, for example, the partner originated public sector or partner growth discount, you can only get one of those. And the partner originated and public sector discount are the most common ones that are used. Okay, so that's the program. If there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And once I've gone through the slides, I will come back to the chat to make sure I answer any of those. Now, with transaction models with AWS, most of the billing is done under standard transactions. It's pretty complicated though, and this is where Westcon's Partner Success Center really kick into gear. On the 5th of each month, we're given an invoice from AWS for the previous month's billing. So on the 5th of August, we get the July billing. It's around 8,000 lines in an Excel spreadsheet for $10,000 of billing, to give you an idea. Then 2 weeks later, AWS send us a file for here's the discounts that should be related to that billing, which is full of mistakes. And we have to go back to AWS to ask them to correct those mistakes. You know, for instance, if they had agreed to 24 months of a discount and then they reduced that to, they've only given 13 months, we spot that and we go back to them and say, please correct it. So that takes about a couple of weeks. Towards the end of the month, we're comfortable with, we know exactly what should be billed, and then Westcon will bill our partners in New Zealand in a New Zealand dollar bill that's available in an Excel spreadsheet and also on Partner Central to be able to view. And it's very simplified. So you can see customer name, what was the technology, what discounts applied, and what's been billed to you. Also importantly, that's when your payment terms start. So if you were billing directly with AWS, your payment terms would have started on the 5th of the month when you first received that bill. But for Westcon, you essentially get a free month because while we're sorting out all those problems with AWS, we don't start billing with our resellers. It is important to note as well that the reseller buy price of AWS does not change whether you buy direct from AWS or via a distributor. It's a channel neutral model. And the same goes for end users. If an end user is buying AWS on their credit card and wanted to transfer their billing to you, that does not change the customer price. You would get access to the 3% base discount and the customer would still be paying what they pay, and Westcon still has their distribution margin that's negotiated with AWS in the back end. AWS want to build a channel and they have built the program discounting accordingly. If you were going to be billing directly with AWS, and there are some of the partners, you can probably guess the sort of organizations in New Zealand that do, they have to have their own organization to be able to dissect those bills from AWS to bill their customers. So doing this with Westcon means you don't have to have that set up within each reseller. We can do that on behalf of any number of resellers in New Zealand so that you're not having to worry about that complexity. Now, the other way to transact is via the AWS Marketplace. Now, customers that would want to do this have what's called, in old terms, an EDP, an Enterprise Discount Program, or in new terms, a PPA, a Private Pricing Agreement, where they've agreed to spend a certain amount over a period of time and get certain pricing from AWS because of that. Now, they can consume 25% of that agreement on third-party products that are purchased via the marketplace. The most common way to do that is CPPO, the Consulting Partner Private Offer. So as an example, in New Zealand with Westcon, we have Cisco, Palo, Zscaler, Checkpoint, and F5 available to be able to be purchased via the AWS Marketplace. I won't talk you through the DSOR side. That's just slightly different as to who bills who, but you could read up on that later. For CPPO, what happens is, as an example, Cisco creates an offer in the AWS Marketplace. We receive that offer and extend that to the end customer. The customer pays AWS. AWS pay us our margin. We pay the reseller their margin. And Cisco would pay the listing fee, which is between 1.5% and 2.5% for Marketplace. And AWS, once they've received the money from the end user, pays the third-party vendor. All of the pricing and everything is agreed upfront, just like you would for any other opportunity that goes to non-standard pricing with those vendors. So we don't go extending an offer to an end customer where there hasn't been a conversation and an agreement made with the reseller on exactly what the margins are and pricing and that sort of stuff that's going to flow through. And same thing with that third-party vendor. So remember, that's 25% of the PPA can be consumed buying third-party products via the AWS Marketplace. Okay, in terms of what Westcon can do for partners in New Zealand, just to put some numbers behind this, Westcon sells 50 vendors of products to 3,000 end users in New Zealand via 500 resellers. We've found that there's about 250 of those resellers in New Zealand that sell something complementary to AWS, and that's who we've invited to the call today because we think your customers may want to be buying AWS through you when they go down that path, and we think it probably suits your business to do it. We don't want to be dragging resellers that don't do data center storage type business into the AWS world. But if you've been selling something that's complementary, then it would make sense that we try to make sure that we preserve that relationship. Essentially, we want to make sure when those 3,000 end users go to buy AWS, they buy it from the partner that they work with today. And to that end, we're going to be starting to do marketing to the end users so that we gather leads as a distributor and can then pass those leads to each of the resellers that own the relationship with that end user. We can still do marketing with partners to your customers. So if you wanted co-branded material to run your own campaigns with your customers, we can do that. But we typically find that systems integrators don't like marketing one particular vendor to their customers because you're normally agnostic in terms of which vendor is provided, because you're trying to solve a customer problem and provide the capability they need, not necessarily a specific vendor. But we do need to raise the awareness about new technologies, and if those end users are interested, pass that back to you. Now, if you don't have the capability in services yet, we can also provide those services in terms of pre-sales and post-sales, white labeled. Juan, who's our pre-sales lead for AWS in New Zealand, can help you on any technical calls with customers, but we can also provide cloud readiness assessments and cloud security assessments, which are paid services for customers if they require that. You can use the funding in the programs to fund those assessments as well. And when it comes to implementation, you can white label those services from us. So for $775 a day paid up front or $910 a day paid in arrears, we can do the implementations. Westcon does not want to build a services business. So this is only if you need this in the interim. And as soon as you've got your own services, we back off. And this doesn't need to be branded as Westcon. As I say, it's white labeled, so you can use those services as if they're your own. So we are still aggregating technology as a distie, selling through our resellers to the end user, but you'll start to see us marketing to those end users and filling the gap with those services where you don't have the capability. It also means you can get started with AWS without having to build all those competencies yourself, which take time. You can build that up as you get a critical mass of business and want to make that investment. Okay, getting started with AWS, and this is the last topic before I'll stop and have a look at the chat window to see if there's any questions. And I should have said up front that I want to make sure that we try to keep this short rather than taking up the entire hour, given this is just focused on the program and getting started. So yeah, I'd say we'll likely be able to give you about 20 minutes of your time back. So getting started with AWS, if you wanted to sign up as a partner after today, and we'll send these instructions through to you on email as well, you sign up on the Amazon Partner Network, and the link is there. Once you click on here, you would sign a distribution seller agreement, and then I would recommend that you start looking at your customers and to understand who has current AWS billing today that could be moved across to be billing under you so that you start to build your AWS customer database straight away. And if you wanted to move to Select in a speedy fashion, you could start doing the sales certs, the pre-sales cert, and the cloud practitioner individual certification as well. And then look for 3 customers that you can launch with AWS. They have to be registered on ACE first. So just make sure that you do that before you submit for your select tier level under the services path. Now we will have that technical overview session from Juan on the 10th of September at 10 a.m. You'll find an invite will come to you either later today or tomorrow. So if you wanted to have pre-sales people attend to understand what are the technologies from AWS, that session would be a great follow-up. Now, as some takeaway slides, and I'm not going to take you through this, but I wanted the partners on this call to see how you could get started with AWS from a customer standpoint or even for your own infrastructure. AWS provide what's called starter kits, which is essentially an off-the-shelf configuration to be able to use 10 different technologies. So they've got starter kits for database, Active Directory, networking, secure storage, virtualization, Veritas, virtual machine. So virtual machine is for customers that haven't used virtual machines before. The virtualization one is more for customers that are coming off VMware to using AWS for virtualization instead. Then you've got WAF, web hosting, and generative AI. There is a slide for each of these starter kits so that you can see exactly what's included in terms of the capacity. And up in the right-hand side, you can see where the pricing starts from. Most of the pricing examples that you'll be given is based on hosting in Sydney or Melbourne, which is what most of the customers in New Zealand do today, given that there's no data sovereignty issues between the 2 countries. There will be a data center built for AWS in New Zealand. They're targeting the end of the year, but they do put a proviso on that saying it is likely that there'll be a bit of a delay, and then the hosting would be able to be done in New Zealand, but at least without the data sovereignty issues from Australia is fine. So there's 1 page for each of these starter kits as takeaways for you to be able to have a look at. And remember, these can be turned on for a month and turned off if you as an organization, as an integrator or an end user would like to give these a try as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there and just check if there are questions in the chat. Nothing there at the moment. Did anyone want to come off mute to ask any questions, or feel free if you wanted to ask questions one-on-one over email after today as well, given the shared audience. Okay, great. Well, look, I'll leave it there and make sure that we share the recording after today. We'll share that with anyone who registered, not just attended. Feel free to forward that to others within your organisation, and please look out for the invite for the 10th of September. But thank you for joining the call today, and thank you for the broader Westcon team for attending as well. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.